The fluorescent lights of Downtown Financial Plaza cast harsh shadows across the underground parking garage as Sarah Chen hurried toward her reserved spot, her heels echoing against concrete walls that seemed to amplify every sound. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. At 34, she had built Chen Technologies from a small startup in her garage into a multi-million-dollar cybersecurity firm, but tonight, success felt more like a target painted on her back. The anonymous letters had started 3 months ago, innocuous at first, then increasingly detailed and threatening. Tonight felt different, though. Charged with a tension that made her skin crawl as she fumbled with her car keys, Marcus Rodriguez had been mopping these same floors for 8 months now, his shift starting at 11 p.m. when the last executives finally abandoned their glass offices for the night. To anyone watching, he was just another invisible service worker, pushing his cart through empty hallways with methodical precision. But old habits died hard, and 20 years of Marine Corps training had taught him to notice everything. The way shadows fell, how sounds traveled, which cars belonged in the garage and which ones had been circling the block for the past hour. Tonight, something was wrong. Sarah's breath formed small clouds in the cold air as she approached her silver BMW, her mind already racing through tomorrow's board presentation. The hostile takeover attempt by Meridian Corp had consumed her thoughts for weeks, leaving little energy for anything else. She dismissed her assistant's concerns about the letters, attributing them to disgruntled competitors or desperate job seekers. In the cutthroat world of corporate technology, threats came with the territory. But as her keys slid into the door lock, a sound made her freeze. Footsteps. Deliberate. Getting closer. Marcus had noticed the man in the dark sedan 2 weeks ago, same time every night, always parking 3 spaces down from the CEO spot. Professional instinct told him this wasn't coincidence. During his deployment in Afghanistan, he'd learned to read situations like this, to spot the signs that civilians missed. The way the stranger positioned himself for optimal sightlines, how he timed his movements to coincide with Sarah's arrival. The careful distance he maintained, close enough to observe, far enough to avoid security cameras. Marcus had been watching the watcher, documenting patterns, preparing for the moment when observation would escalate to action. Sarah's hands trembled as she tried to unlock her car, the footsteps now close enough that she could hear breathing behind her. The parking garage that had always felt safe, protected by security cards and surveillance systems, suddenly felt like a trap. She thought about screaming, but who would hear her 3 levels underground? Her phone was buried in her purse, and turning around felt impossible, as if acknowledging her pursuer would somehow make the threat more real. The footsteps stopped directly behind her, and she could feel someone's presence like a physical weight pressing against her shoulders. Marcus moved with practiced silence, his approach masked by the hum of ventilation systems and distant traffic. He'd positioned himself perfectly, using concrete pillars for cover while maintaining clear sightlines to both Sarah and her stalker. The man was average height, wearing dark clothing, holding something in his right hand that caught the light wrong. Not a weapon exactly, but not innocent either. Marcus calculated distances, angles, potential outcomes. His military training had prepared him for situations exactly like this, where hesitation could mean the difference between safety and tragedy. The janitor's uniform felt strange after years of combat gear, but his instincts remained sharp as ever. Marcus Rodriguez had not always been the quiet man who cleaned office buildings in downtown Seattle. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. 3 years earlier, he had been Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, leading a specialized security unit in one of the most dangerous regions of the Middle East. His team had been responsible for protecting high-value targets, civilians and military personnel whose lives depended on his ability to read situations before they became deadly. He had been good at his job, exceptional even, with commendations that filled a folder he never looked at anymore. The transition from military hero to single father had happened in the space of a single phone call. His wife Maria had been driving home from her job at the elementary school when a drunk driver ran a red light. The impact had been instant and devastating, leaving Marcus alone with their 6-year-old daughter Emma, who suddenly needed a father who could be present instead of deployed. The choice had been simple but painful. He had submitted his resignation from the Marines, packed up their life on base, and moved to Seattle where Maria's sister lived, hoping family connections might help heal the wounds that seemed too deep for time alone to mend. The night shift at Downtown Financial Plaza paid enough to cover their modest apartment and Emma's expenses, while allowing Marcus to be home when she returned from school each afternoon. During the day, he helped with homework, attended parent-teacher conferences, and learned to braid hair through YouTube tutorials that made him miss Maria's gentle hands even more. The work itself was honest and necessary, maintaining the pristine environment that housed millions of dollars in technology and business deals. But it was also invisible work, performed when the building's occupants were safely at home, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and the ghosts of a life that felt increasingly distant. Emma had adapted to their new circumstances with the resilience that children possess but adults often lose. She had stopped asking when Daddy would go back to being a soldier, accepting that their adventures now involved exploring Seattle's parks and libraries instead of video calls from military bases. But Marcus could see the sadness in her eyes during quiet moments, the way she held onto his hand a little tighter when they walked past families that looked more complete than theirs. She deserved better than a father who cleaned floors for a living, but it was the best he could offer while keeping his promise to always be there when she needed him. Sarah Chen's path to corporate success had been built on a foundation of relentless determination and an almost supernatural ability to anticipate technological trends before they became mainstream. Her parents had immigrated from Taiwan when she was 8, carrying nothing but engineering degrees that American companies initially refused to recognize, and a faith in education that bordered on religious devotion. They had worked multiple jobs to afford a small house in a good school district, sacrificing their own comfort so Sarah could have opportunities they had been denied. The pressure to succeed had been constant but loving, expressed through late-night study sessions and weekends spent at science fairs instead of shopping malls. Sarah had excelled in mathematics and computer science, earning scholarships that carried her through Stanford and eventually to graduate school at MIT. Her doctoral thesis on predictive cybersecurity algorithms had caught the attention of several major technology companies, but Sarah had chosen to start her own firm instead, convinced that innovation required independence from corporate bureaucracy that stifled creative thinking. Chen Technologies had grown from a one-woman operation in her garage to a company employing over 200 people in just 7 years. Sarah's approach to cybersecurity was revolutionary, using artificial intelligence to predict and prevent attacks before they occurred, rather than simply responding after systems had been compromised. Major corporations paid millions for her software, and government agencies sought her expertise on national security matters. But success had come at a personal cost that Sarah was only beginning to understand. The threatening letters had started arriving at her office 3 months ago, typed on generic paper with no return address or identifying marks. The first few had been dismissible, vague references to her company's work, and accusations that she was somehow responsible for problems she had never heard of. But they had grown more specific and disturbing, mentioning details about her daily routines that suggested surveillance, her home address, her favorite coffee shop, the time she typically left work each evening. The most recent letter had included a photograph of her walking to her car, taken from a distance, but clear enough to be unmistakably threatening. Sarah had hired a private security firm to investigate, but their findings had been frustratingly vague. The letters contained no fingerprints or DNA evidence. The photographs had been taken with equipment available at any electronics store, and the investigation had revealed no obvious suspects among former employees or business rivals. The security company had recommended bodyguards and suggested she vary her routine, advice that felt both excessive and inadequate for a threat she could not properly identify or understand. The stalking had begun to affect her work in ways that frustrated her more than the fear itself. Sarah prided herself on focus and analytical thinking, but constant vigilance was exhausting in ways that left her struggling to concentrate during important meetings. She had started staying later at the office, hoping that extended work hours might somehow outlast whoever was watching her. The irony was bitter. She had spent her career protecting other people's digital lives from invisible threats, but she seemed powerless against someone who had chosen to make her own life a target. Marcus had been watching the situation develop for weeks before he understood the full scope of what was happening. His military training had taught him to observe patterns and assess threats, skills that translated surprisingly well to building security. He had noticed the same car in the parking garage on multiple occasions, always positioned to observe the executive parking area. The driver was careful but not professional, maintaining surveillance without the discipline that military or law enforcement training would have provided. During his years in the Marines, Marcus had protected diplomats, journalists, and aid workers, whose lives were constantly at risk from people who viewed them as symbols rather than human beings. He recognized the signs of escalation, the way observation became harassment, and harassment became something worse. The man stalking Sarah Chen was following a pattern that Marcus had seen before, and he knew from experience that these situations rarely resolved themselves peacefully without intervention. The decision to get involved had not been conscious or planned. Marcus simply found himself adjusting his cleaning schedule to ensure he was always in the parking garage when Sarah arrived each evening. He positioned his cart strategically, creating sight lines that allowed him to monitor both Sarah and her stalker while maintaining the appearance of routine maintenance work. It was a delicate balance, providing protection without creating alarm. But it was work he had been trained for in environments far more dangerous than a corporate parking garage. Emma had noticed the change in her father's mood, the way he seemed more alert and focused when he returned from work each morning. She had grown accustomed to reading his expressions during their years together, understanding when he was thinking about mommy and when he was simply tired from working all night. But lately he seemed different, more like the soldier she remembered from her early childhood, when he had worn uniforms and carried himself with a purpose that extended beyond their small family. She was too young to understand the details, but old enough to sense that something important was happening in the world her father occupied. While she slept, the confrontation happened on a Tuesday night when the autumn rain had turned the parking garage into a symphony of echoing drips and distant thunder. Sarah had worked later than usual, finalizing contracts that could secure her company's future for the next decade. The building was nearly empty by the time she gathered her briefcase and headed for the elevator, her mind still processing numbers and projections that would determine whether Chen Technologies could compete with the tech giants trying to buy them out. Marcus had been tracking the stalker's pattern for 3 weeks, noting how the man's behavior had become increasingly bold and erratic. Tonight felt different from the moment Marcus arrived for his shift. The stranger had positioned his vehicle closer to Sarah's parking spot than ever before, and something about his posture suggested that observation was no longer enough to satisfy whatever need drove his obsession. Marcus had seen this progression before during his military service, the way threats escalated when the person making them grew tired of waiting for their target to acknowledge their power. When Sarah's heels clicked against the concrete floor of the parking garage, Marcus was already in position near the maintenance closet, his cart arranged to provide both cover and mobility. He watched as the stalker emerged from his sedan, moving with a confidence that sent warning signals through every instinct Marcus had developed over 2 decades of protecting people from violence. The man was carrying something in his jacket pocket, and his approach towards Sarah was direct and purposeful, rather than the careful surveillance Marcus had observed in previous weeks. Sarah sensed the danger before she saw it, that primitive awareness that humans develop when they are being hunted. She had been fumbling with her car keys when she heard footsteps that were too deliberate, too focused to belong to another late-working executive heading home. When she turned around, the man was less than 10 feet away, close enough that she could see the intensity in his eyes and the way his hand moved toward his jacket pocket. Fear paralyzed her for a moment that felt like an eternity, her mind struggling to process that the abstract threat from anonymous letters had suddenly become terrifyingly real. Marcus moved with the fluid precision that military training had burned into his muscle memory. He stepped out from behind his cart and positioned himself between Sarah and her stalker, his movements calm but unmistakably authoritative. His voice carried the kind of quiet command that had once directed soldiers in combat situations, firm enough to demand attention without creating panic. He spoke directly to the stranger, using techniques learned from years of de-escalating volatile situations, where lives hung in the balance of the right words spoken at the right moment. The stalker had clearly not anticipated interference from someone he had dismissed as irrelevant maintenance staff. His surprise gave Marcus the opening he needed to assess the situation more completely. The man was agitated, but not professionally dangerous, motivated by obsession rather than training, which made him unpredictable but also vulnerable to psychological pressure. Marcus positioned himself to block the stalker's access to Sarah, while maintaining his own ability to respond physically if words proved insufficient to resolve the threat peacefully. Sarah watched in amazement as the quiet janitor she had barely noticed transformed into someone completely different. There was an authority in his presence that commanded the space around him, a confidence that suggested he had faced far more dangerous situations than a corporate parking garage confrontation. The way he spoke to her stalker was neither aggressive nor intimidating, but carried an unmistakable message that the current situation would not be allowed to continue. She found herself feeling safer than she had in months, protected by someone whose competence was obvious even in circumstances she did not fully understand. The stalker attempted to argue, claiming that Sarah owed him something for work he had done for her company, accusations that made no sense but revealed the delusional thinking that had driven his harassment campaign. Marcus listened without engaging with the content of the complaints, instead focusing on the emotional state underlying the words. He recognized the signs of someone who had constructed an elaborate fantasy around a perceived relationship that existed only in his imagination, a dangerous delusion that required careful handling to prevent escalation into violence. Marcus guided the conversation toward practical resolution, rather than trying to argue with beliefs that had no basis in reality. He acknowledged the man's feelings without validating his actions, using techniques learned from military psychologists who had taught him to manage civilians experiencing extreme stress or trauma. His goal was not to win an argument, but to diffuse a situation that could easily spiral beyond anyone's control if handled incorrectly. The stalker needed to feel heard while being firmly redirected away from behavior that threatened Sarah's safety. The breakthrough came when Marcus offered the stalker a choice between leaving voluntarily or having the situation resolved through law enforcement involvement. He presented these options without threat or ultimatum, simply as natural consequences that would follow from continued harassment. The man's obsession had fed on Sarah's fear and helplessness, but Marcus's calm competence disrupted the dynamic that had allowed the stalking to continue. Faced with someone who clearly would not be intimidated, the stalker's confidence began to crumble. Sarah called the police from her car, while Marcus maintained visual contact with the stalker until security backup arrived. She found herself studying this man who had appeared from nowhere to protect her, noticing details she had missed during their brief previous encounters. There was something military in his bearing, a watchfulness that suggested experience with real danger rather than the corporate conflicts that dominated her professional world. When the police arrived and began taking statements, Marcus answered their questions with the precision of someone accustomed to providing tactical reports under pressure. The police sergeant recognized Marcus immediately, addressing him by rank rather than name, and Sarah realized that her protector was not just a janitor who happened to be in the right place at the right time. The respect in the officer's voice suggested a history of service that explained Marcus's competence in handling dangerous situations. As the stalker was led away in handcuffs, Sarah felt a mixture of relief and curiosity about the man who had risked his own safety to protect someone he barely knew. Marcus deflected her attempts to thank him, treating his intervention as nothing more than basic human decency rather than heroism. But Sarah had built a successful business by recognizing talent and competence when she encountered it, and everything about Marcus's handling of the situation suggested capabilities that extended far beyond building maintenance. The way he had assessed the threat, managed the confrontation, and coordinated with law enforcement spoke to training and experience that seemed wasted on night shift cleaning duties. After giving her statement to the police, Sarah found herself reluctant to leave the parking garage and return to her empty house. The adrenaline was beginning to fade, leaving her shaky and uncertain in ways that success and wealth had never prepared her to handle. Marcus seemed to understand her hesitation, offering to follow her home to ensure she arrived safely, a kindness that felt both professional and genuinely caring. For the first time in months, Sarah felt protected rather than hunted, watched over rather than stalked. The drive to her house in Queen Anne took 15 minutes, but it gave Sarah time to process what had happened and to consider what she knew about the man who had likely saved her from serious harm. Marcus followed at a discreet distance, close enough to provide security but far enough away to avoid making her feel pursued. When they arrived at her house, he waited in his truck until she was safely inside, with the lights on and the security system activated, simple gestures that demonstrated a level of care that went beyond professional obligation. Standing in her kitchen afterward, Sarah realized that she knew almost nothing about Marcus Rodriguez beyond his name and his apparent willingness to risk his own safety for her protection. The contrast between his day job and his evident capabilities raised questions that she could not easily dismiss. In a world where she was accustomed to buying solutions to problems, she had been rescued by someone who asked for nothing in return, protected by competence that seemed dramatically underutilized in his current employment situation. Sarah spent the following morning researching Marcus Rodriguez with the same methodical intensity she applied to business acquisitions. What she discovered left her staring at her computer screen in disbelief, questioning everything she thought she understood about merit, opportunity, and the invisible people who kept her world functioning. The man who mopped her floors and emptied her trash cans was Staff Sergeant Marcus Rodriguez, recipient of 2 Bronze Stars and a Purple Heart, former leader of a specialized protection unit that had safeguarded diplomats and high-value civilians in some of the most dangerous regions on Earth. The military records she could access painted a picture of exceptional service and leadership. Marcus had completed advanced training in threat assessment, crisis management, and personal protection that cost the government hundreds of thousands of dollars to provide. His unit had a perfect safety record during his tenure, protecting over 40 different individuals during deployments that spanned 6 years and 3 continents. The commendations in his file read like a catalog of situations where his quick thinking and tactical expertise had prevented catastrophic outcomes. But it was the employment records that made Sarah's stomach turn with recognition of systematic failure. 18 months earlier, Marcus had applied for a position as head of security at Chen Technologies, a role that Sarah herself had approved creating after a series of industrial espionage attempts had compromised several client accounts. His application had been flawless, demonstrating exactly the kind of experience and expertise they desperately needed. His salary requirements had been modest for someone of his qualifications, and his references from former commanding officers read like endorsements for sainthood. The application had been rejected by their automated screening system for a reason that made Sarah want to throw her laptop across the room. Marcus had listed his most recent employment as stay-at-home father, a gap in traditional employment that the algorithm had flagged as a red flag indicating unreliability. The software had been programmed to prioritize candidates with continuous corporate experience, automatically eliminating anyone whose career path deviated from conventional patterns, regardless of their actual qualifications or circumstances. Sarah pulled up the hiring records for the security position they had eventually filled, her anger building with each page of documentation. They had hired Derek Manning, a former mall security guard, whose primary qualification was a 2-year associate degree in criminal justice, and a recommendation from a board member's nephew. Manning had lasted 8 months before being terminated for sleeping on duty and falsifying security reports. The position had remained vacant since his departure, with security responsibilities distributed among existing staff who had no specialized training in threat assessment or personal protection. The mathematics of institutional stupidity were staggering. Chen Technologies had rejected the most qualified candidate they had ever received for a critical position, then hired someone completely inadequate through personal connections, only to fire that person and leave the role unfilled. Meanwhile, the man they had rejected was working night shifts in their own building for a third of the salary they had budgeted for the security position, while providing the exact expertise they needed to protect their most valuable asset, Sarah herself. The discovery forced Sarah to confront uncomfortable truths about the systems she had built and the assumptions that guided her decision-making. She had always prided herself on running a meritocracy, believing that talent and hard work would naturally rise to the top in her organization. But the evidence suggested that her hiring processes systematically excluded people whose life experiences did not fit conventional corporate templates, regardless of their actual capabilities or potential contributions. Sarah found Marcus in the employee break room during his dinner break, eating a sandwich while helping his daughter Emma with homework over a video call. The sight of him patiently explaining fractions to a 6-year-old while wearing a janitor's uniform that concealed 2 decades of military excellence created a cognitive dissonance that Sarah struggled to process. This was a man who had protected ambassadors and generals, reduced to cleaning offices because no algorithm could recognize the value of choosing family over career advancement. The conversation that followed was unlike any Sarah had experienced in her professional life. Marcus listened without defensiveness as she explained what she had discovered about his application and the systematic failures that had led to his rejection. He acknowledged her findings with the same calm competence he had shown during the parking garage confrontation, neither angry about the missed opportunity nor grateful for her belated recognition of his qualifications. His focus remained on Emma's homework, and the practical matter of ensuring she understood mathematical concepts that would help her succeed in school. When Sarah offered him the security position that should have been his 18 months earlier, Marcus asked questions that revealed priorities she had not anticipated. He wanted to know about scheduling flexibility that would allow him to maintain his presence in Emma's life. He inquired about healthcare benefits that would cover a child with no other parent to provide backup insurance. He asked about the company's policies regarding family emergencies and school events, concerns that had never occurred to Sarah when designing executive compensation packages. The negotiation challenged every assumption Sarah had developed about what motivated exceptional people to accept positions of responsibility. Marcus was not interested in the corner office or the executive parking space that typically came with senior security roles. He wanted assurance that protecting Sarah would not require him to abandon his commitment to protecting Emma. The conversation forced Sarah to recognize that her company's culture had been designed around the assumption that work would always take priority over personal obligations, a framework that systematically excluded people whose lives included responsibilities that could not be rescheduled for corporate convenience. Marcus agreed to accept the position under conditions that required Sarah to fundamentally rethink how her company approached work-life integration. He would need the flexibility to adjust his schedule around Emma's school events and medical appointments. His office would need to accommodate after-school visits when childcare arrangements fell through. The company would need to provide backup security coverage during family emergencies that required his attention, recognizing that effective protection sometimes meant having a protector whose own life was stable and well-supported. The conversation revealed the depth of sacrifice that Marcus had made in choosing fatherhood over career advancement. He could have leveraged his military experience into lucrative private security contracts that would have tripled his income, but those positions would have required travel that made single parenting impossible. He could have pursued government positions that would have utilized his expertise, but the hours and security clearance requirements would have kept him away from Emma during the critical years when she needed stability more than financial advancement. Sarah realized that she was not just offering Marcus a job, but acknowledging a value system that her company had previously failed to recognize. His willingness to prioritize Emma's emotional well-being over professional advancement represented exactly the kind of character and judgment she needed in someone responsible for her safety. The fact that he had been willing to work night shifts and accept lower pay rather than compromise his commitment to his daughter demonstrated the kind of integrity that no interview process could adequately assess. The irony was not lost on either of them. Sarah had built a company worth millions by anticipating problems before they became critical, but she had failed to recognize that the solution to her own security needs was already working in her building. Marcus had protected her from a dangerous stalker while officially employed to empty her trash cans, providing professional-grade personal security services for free because his moral code did not allow him to ignore someone in danger, regardless of his job description. As they finalized the details of his new position, Sarah found herself reflecting on the broader implications of what she had learned. How many other exceptional people were trapped in positions that underutilized their talents because systems designed to identify merit were actually screening for conformity? How many potential solutions to critical problems were being overlooked because they did not fit conventional patterns of how expertise should present itself? The transformation from janitor to security director would be immediate, but Sarah recognized that the more important change would be in her company's approach to recognizing value in unexpected places. Marcus had demonstrated that competence often came disguised as ordinary work performed by people whose circumstances had forced them to accept positions that did not reflect their true capabilities. The challenge would be developing systems that could identify and utilize that hidden potential, rather than systematically excluding it through algorithmic bias and cultural assumptions about what success was supposed to look like. 6 months later, Sarah stood in the conference room overlooking downtown Seattle, watching Marcus conduct a security briefing for her executive team with the same quiet authority he had displayed in the parking garage. His transformation from night janitor to director of security had been seamless in practice, though it had required her entire organization to reconsider how they measured competence and valued experience. The changes he had implemented went far beyond personal protection, establishing comprehensive threat assessment protocols that had already prevented 2 serious industrial espionage attempts. Emma Rodriguez had become a regular presence in the Chen Technologies office, arriving each afternoon to complete homework in the security department while her father finished his daily responsibilities. The sight of a 6-year-old explaining her math problems to cybersecurity engineers had initially raised eyebrows among staff who were unaccustomed to children in their workspace. But Emma's presence had gradually transformed the company culture in ways that Sarah had not anticipated, creating a more human environment where people felt comfortable discussing their lives outside of work. The most significant change had been in Sarah herself. Working closely with Marcus had forced her to examine the assumptions that had guided her approach to leadership and success. His willingness to prioritize Emma's needs had challenged her belief that professional advancement required personal sacrifice. She had begun leaving the office earlier, not because her work was less important, but because she had learned to recognize that sustainable success required balance rather than constant intensity. Marcus had restructured the security department to reflect lessons learned from military service about the importance of supporting the whole person rather than just their professional function. He had implemented flexible scheduling that allowed team members to attend family events without compromising coverage. He had established partnerships with local childcare providers to assist employees during school closures and family emergencies. The changes had initially met resistance from executives who worried about productivity, but employee retention had improved dramatically while security effectiveness reached new standards. The relationship between Sarah and Marcus had evolved into something neither had expected when she offered him the security position. Their professional collaboration had developed into genuine friendship, built on mutual respect for each other's expertise, and shared commitment to creating an organization that valued both excellence and humanity. Marcus brought perspective from his military experience about leadership under pressure, while Sarah shared insights about strategic thinking and long-term planning that helped him approach security challenges with business acumen. Emma had become Sarah's unofficial advisor on workplace culture, offering observations about office dynamics with the clarity that only children possess. Her questions about why people seemed stressed all the time had prompted Sarah to examine whether the pressure she considered motivational might actually be counterproductive. Emma's suggestions for improving employee happiness were often more insightful than expensive consulting reports, leading to changes like flexible lunch schedules and quiet spaces for phone calls with family members. The stalking incident had led to broader changes in how Chen Technologies approached employee safety and well-being. Marcus had developed comprehensive personal security training for all staff, teaching awareness techniques that could help them recognize and respond to various threats. But the program had expanded beyond physical safety to include mental health resources and support systems for employees experiencing personal difficulties that might affect their professional performance. Sarah had also transformed her hiring practices, implementing new screening procedures designed to identify talent regardless of unconventional career paths. The company had hired 3 veterans whose military experience translated perfectly to cybersecurity challenges, 2 single parents whose flexible scheduling needs had been viewed as liabilities by previous employers, and a former teacher whose communication skills had revolutionized their client training programs. Each hire had strengthened the organization while proving that diverse experiences often provided exactly the perspectives needed for innovative solutions. Marcus had maintained his commitment to community service, volunteering with organizations that helped veterans transition to civilian careers. His success story had become a model for other companies seeking to tap into underutilized talent pools. He spoke regularly at job fairs and networking events, sharing strategies for translating military skills into corporate environments, while advocating for hiring practices that looked beyond traditional credentials to assess actual capabilities. The friendship between Emma and Sarah had surprised both of their fathers with its depth and mutual benefit. Emma's natural curiosity about technology had led to informal mentoring sessions where Sarah explained basic programming concepts while learning about problem-solving approaches from a child's perspective. Sarah had discovered that explaining complex ideas to a 6-year-old improved her own understanding and helped her communicate more effectively with clients and investors. The company's financial performance had improved significantly since Marcus joined the security team, though the correlation had taken months to become apparent. His threat assessment protocols had prevented costly data breaches that could have destroyed client relationships. His employee support initiatives had reduced turnover expenses while improving productivity through higher engagement levels. The flexibility policies had attracted exceptional candidates who might otherwise have chosen competitors with more family-friendly cultures. Sarah had learned that her initial instinct to protect her business through barriers and distance had been counterproductive. Marcus had shown her that real security came from building systems strong enough to handle uncertainty, rather than trying to eliminate all possible risks. The lesson applied beyond physical safety to business strategy, innovation, and personal relationships, encouraging calculated risks that could lead to significant rewards. The story had no dramatic ending because the most important changes were ongoing processes rather than single events. Marcus continued learning about corporate culture while contributing military precision to business challenges. Sarah kept discovering how personal authenticity improved professional effectiveness. Emma grew up in an environment where competence was valued regardless of its packaging, where adults took responsibility for each other's success, and where work could enhance rather than diminish family relationships. The transformation had rippled beyond Chen Technologies to influence other organizations seeking to improve both performance and employee satisfaction. Sarah and Marcus had co-authored articles about integrating military talent into civilian workplaces, while their company had become a case study for business schools teaching about innovative hiring practices and cultural change management. Most importantly, both had learned that help often comes from unexpected sources, that competence exists in forms that conventional systems fail to recognize, and that the most valuable relationships develop when people are willing to see beyond surface appearances, to appreciate the full depth of each other's capabilities and character. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.